Good morning and welcome to the Bronx County Historical Society's Oral History Projects. Today I am joined by Michele Abrams. I am Pastor Crespo, the Research Librarian and Archivist for the Bronx County Historical Society. Michele, would you introduce yourself?
Michele Abrams, Robin Abrams, and I am a Bronxite in my heart and my soul, even though I don't live here anymore. And have actually not lived here for a very long time.
Okay, all right. When'd you move away?
So I left the Bronx when I was 20. I am now 69. Doesn't feel like it's been that long, of course, but I was born, I can start there, on August 24th, 1955 at Bronx Hospital. I am the middle child of 3 to Jack and Miriam Abrams, and we lived at 2116 Morris Avenue originally in a 2-bedroom, basically a 4-room apartment so it was me and my sister and later my brother, who's younger, and my grandmother. And we all lived in that apartment. 2 bedrooms, living room, little bathroom, little kitchen. And it was glorious, you know? It was loving and small and intimate. And then I had another grandmother who lived in the same building, a few stories up, Martha Abrams. And then we moved down the block to a palatious 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment that they were probably paying, I don't know, $105 or something a month. And they were worried that they wouldn't be able to afford it because, you know, it was so much more. And I went to PS 79 for elementary school, which was right across the street.
Before your school, the neighborhood on Morris Avenue, what neighborhood is that considered?
So it was between Burnside Avenue and 181st Street or 180th Street, a couple of blocks off of the Grand Concourse.
Okay.
And the Grand Concourse was, you know, very fancy.
Got it. So you were born in the mid-50s.
Yes.
So you have recollections of the mid-60s.
Yes.
What was that neighborhood like? What were the demographics? Who was there?
So it was a very Jewish neighborhood.
Okay.
There were some people who were Italian and some people who were Irish. But the elementary school, my classes were primarily Jewish because I think the kids who were Catholic mostly went to Catholic school. And so, and you know, I have to laugh because the girls were either Patty or Kathy. Those were just very common names, and they tended not to be at the public school. So it was a very, not very diverse, really.
Okay.
I didn't know that Jews were a minority until I went to college. I mean, I knew it intellectually, but my world, you know, was really very Jewish. The doctors, the baker, the candy store people, everybody in the area. So that's how I grew up. My grandmother, Zelda Hoffman, who lived with me, came from Poland in the early 1900s. And she came because of pogroms in Poland. Came with 2 small children. Her husband had come 6 months before, and she was here for 6 months, and he died. And there she was, you know, not speaking the language with 2 small children. She then met my grandfather, had my mother, and that was sort of the history with that. So the 1960s was a tumultuous time in the world. But in my little world, it was very stable and very loving. And, what did we do? There was a candy store in the neighborhood. Nate and Annie ran the candy store. You'd go in, you'd pay a penny for candy. Get an egg cream. I don't know if that's still a thing, getting an egg cream here in the Bronx.
It's rare, but you can find some diners.
With a pretzel, salted pretzel. On Saturday night, I would go with my dad to Jerome Avenue. There was a very big bagel factory that we would go to, we'd walk to, and we'd pick up a newspaper, the Sunday newspaper for the next day. There was a girls' club called Miss Herman's. Essie Herman and her sister Sadie, who I think were in their 80s, honestly, but they may not have been. They may have been in their 60s. They ran this girls' club, and we would go there and dance and sing and play, and they had a little jingle song. It was Essie Herman, the cheergiver's directress. Everybody loved her, we declare, always willing to help us in distress. And then I don't know the rest of it, and then Miss Pond, who was this very, very skeletal-looking elderly woman dancer with crazy red hair, and she did the dancing, taught dance lessons. PS 79 was an elementary school and a boys' junior high.
Oh, wow.
So at that time, there was a boys' junior high school, and there was a girls' junior high school, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, PS 115, which is where I went for junior high. That was off the Grand Concourse, and we would walk there. So it was interesting because we would go from an all-girls public school, an all-girls junior high, all-boys junior high, and then a lot of them would go to Clinton High School, which was all boys at the time, or Walton High School, which was all girls at the time. So even though it was a public school, we could spend 5 or 6 years kind of segregated in that way, which was kind of unusual, I think. And then Co-op City was built.
Before we get to Co-op City,
Okay.
Elementary school, middle school, what kind of kid games in your neighborhood did you play?
We played stickball in the street. We played the Spalding, did the Spalding game. We played, what was that jump rope? Double Dutch.
Okay.
And I think the Double Dutch actually was influenced by our African American and Hispanic friends. Probably that was more their culture, and we would jump that with them. Mostly that was a girl thing. My friend Susan Levy and I would walk to the playground, actually by EBB, PS 115, which is probably half a mile. That seemed very far away at the time, but we would go there to the playground and just play at the playground. And
did your parents have to take you
I
during
was
that
just
time?
going to say, no, we could just go do.
How
We
far away was it?
actually-
Was the playground?
I think it was about a half a mile.
Oh, wow.
Not really that far, because Fordham Road was really only a mile. And we'd take the bus, and we would go to Crumbs, which was a ice cream place. But the other thing we would do, which is fascinating to me, at the age of 11, we would take the subway, just us, down to Manhattan and spend the day, like at Macy's, 34th Street, and that's when 34th Street was pretty rough in the 60s. So at the age of 11, my friend and I would take the subway by ourselves. I mean, I wouldn't hardly do it now. honestly. I don't like taking the subway. But at the time, it was just fine. You know, the world either was very different or we thought it was very different. But we weren't worried. It wasn't scary. We walked all over. We maybe told my mother where we were going.
Now, at home, you know, you're still young.
Right.
Do you recall any of the favorite meals that your mother or anyone at home would make for you?
Oh, yeah. So there was dairy meals. Even though we were not kosher, there were still what we called dairy meals. So we'd have tuna salad, egg salad, white fish, little chubbies. We're familiar with chubby fish. They're like little whitefish, individual. And they would be served on the plate with a little eye looking up at you. And we would just take it apart, you know, on our plate. And that was like a delicacy. And then there was the real standards. Meatloaf, which I don't eat now. I eat so differently now than I did then. Chopped liver, which I still love, but won't eat that very often because it's really not very good for you. Matzo ball soup. We would have, my grandmother did a lot of the cooking. And she was kind of old school. She'd make boiled chicken, which I have to say, I love that. I don't eat chicken often now, but if I do, I really love that. What else did we have? Pretty basic. They were very, you know, my parents didn't have a lot of money. My mother wasn't working at that time. She was home with us. My dad was a television repairman, probably earning, if I remember correctly, $6,000 a year, relative to my friend whose dad was an accountant was earning $10,000 a year. And even though they also lived very similarly to us in an apartment building, that was a really big difference. So I never felt poor. We always had what we needed. It's like my mother always said, if she had extra money, she would buy us Catskills, which is underwear, as opposed to going out, you know. We didn't go out to dinner often. We went out to dinner for somebody's birthday, so like 6 times a year for birthdays. And once when we came back from the country at the end of the summer, because we spent our summers, amazingly, in the Catskills.
Okay.
The entire summer, we would leave the city, and that was a thing. People from the city would leave the city for the whole summer. So for maybe $200 for the entire summer, you could rent like a little cottage at what was called a bungalow colony.
How old were you when those trips started, those summer trips started?
I was very young. I had to have been, because I know one summer my mom was pregnant with my brother, so I was probably up there from probably infancy in the summers until I was about 13.
Okay.
And that saved my life, because I really didn't like being in the city. And so we would be away for the entire summer with the grass and the trees and the birds, and that was really wonderful. So coming back in September after Labor Day felt a little claustrophobic until I got used to it again. So it was like an escape. It was an escape for the whole summer, which was wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, like, you would think that you'd have to be wealthy to do something like that.
Yeah, you know,
Right?
I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, right now people have to go to these summer camps or schools,
Right.
you know, sponsored by the church or the synagogue or a recreation center. So, wow, that, you know, a summer back in the early 60s was affordable to a working class family is
Right. Amazing.
Wow. It is. It's a whole different world.
People came from the boroughs, so it was mostly Bronx, Brooklyn, some people from Queens, and an occasional suburb person. But that was pretty unusual. And in that situation, the family, so the mom, because remember back then, most of the moms were not working outside of the home. So the moms and the kids would go away for the whole summer.
Okay.
The dads would stay in the city and work and come up on the weekends.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's how that went.
That is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
It was awesome.
And were there like people from your neighborhood or?
No.
No.
No. So I had friends from all the different boroughs, and we would keep in touch. I mean, occasionally there would be other people from the Bronx. I had a really good friend who lived in Riverdale,
Okay.
and he would come visit me every once in a while. But then again, when you're that young, that seems really far away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and those are like your summer friends.
Right.
Or we would talk on the phone. You know, I had a good friend who was in Brooklyn,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't see her all year, but we would talk on the phone often.
Okay. Was your family very involved in the synagogue?
No,
No?
not at all. My grandparents were pretty a-religious, so I didn't have grandfathers at that point. They had already passed away. The grandmother who lived with us was the one from Poland. My other grandmother was very American and assimilated. And, you know, she was the one who got dressed up to go out and wore makeup, whereas my European grandmother, she only put a bra on the weekends if she was going to go visit. You know, very, very different. They didn't always get along so well, but they did the best they could. And what was the question?
If you were involved.
Oh, the synagogue. Yeah.
Synagogue.
So we did holidays. We did major holidays, but we did not belong to the synagogue. I think probably for two reasons. There was kind of a sense of you can pray anywhere. You don't have to be there, and finances. I'm going to guess.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you had to pay to be a member, that was probably money they really didn't have.
Right.
And didn't feel the need because it was such a Jewish environment that they didn't really need to do that. Whereas I think once we leave that kind of environment and we're living in neighborhoods where there aren't that many Jewish people,
Mm-hmm.
that then becomes the place that you go in order to be together. So my family, my children, and myself, we were very active in the synagogue, which was kind of foreign to my parents. That was just something they didn't need or do. So as a result, and as a girl, it wasn't necessary to be involved. Whereas my brother, he had to become a bar mitzvah.
Okay.
This is very different, although they still didn't belong to a synagogue until he needed like his bar mitzvah training. I became a bar mitzvah as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose later to learn more, get more involved, and, you know, do it that way.
Got it. Were there any dear friends during your middle school years that just remain in your memory that were just so significant to you growing up?
Absolutely. I mean, Susan Levy was my dearest friend in elementary school, through junior high, into high school. We are Facebook friends now. I saw her last about almost 20 years ago now. I was lucky enough to go to a 6th grade reunion. I hadn't seen those people since 6th grade because we all went to different junior highs or different high schools.
Mm-hmm.
And it was awesome. It was awesome to be reconnected with people who knew you when you were 12 years old. And everybody was the same. We were the same people in our 50s that we were when we were 12.
Wow. Now, in the 60s, you're walking out of your home, your tenement apartment. What are the streets in?
You know, it's interesting
look
that you say tenement. It's like it wasn't a tenement.
Okay.
I think of a tenement as kind of rundown and kind of shabby.
All right.
I mean, that's how I think of the word tenement. You may have meant it differently.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't mean it from the tenement museum,
Right,
and the
right.
Jacob Riis days.
Right, right. So it was, everybody I knew lived in an apartment. And even though we didn't own the apartment, these were our homes. And everybody took care of their home. We painted, we had linoleum on the floor, we decorated. When my parents were young, and they also lived in the Bronx, they would move every 2 years because when you moved into a new apartment, you got a free paint job. So instead of paying to paint their apartment, they would move to another apartment. And that's what they would do. Same neighborhood, same building, but they moved instead of painting, which is amazing, right? We didn't do that. We lived in one apartment, that small apartment, until it got to be just too small, and then moved to the palatial 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment. And it was home.
When did you move to that palatial 4-bedroom apartment? How old were you?
I was 7. I remember my brother was 2, my sister was 10, and we still talk about, my kids even know up Mars Avenue, down Mars Avenue. We have the stories from the 2 different apartments, and it's funny to think we moved from there probably when I was about 13, 14, high school. And yet those years were so impactful that we went by there not that long ago. We had gone to a Yankees game, which is only a mile from there. And so we took a drive and drove, up the street. The 2 buildings that I lived in do not exist anymore. The one up the street across from the school is now a little playground, and the one down the street was rebuilt into another building.
Okay.
But we didn't have trees. There are trees on those streets now. We didn't have trees. There was a boy, Seraphin, who lived across the street in a little garden apartment, and I thought he was wealthy because he wasn't in a building. He was in a garden apartment. He probably was not wealthy, but that was my perception at the time. It was close. The streets are narrow. And it was primarily, at that time, a white neighborhood.
Did it change for you at any time?
It's very interesting. Something that I remember vividly, there was a couple, relatively young couple, an interracial couple. He was black and she was white, she had red hair, and I remember seeing them walking down the street, and it's such a visual memory for me because it was really unusual at that time to see an interracial couple. I mean, it was, I just remember being fascinated by that idea because it was so unusual. And of course, it was probably, certainly in some places, still illegal. Right? I'm trying to remember when it became legal. The love, the love.
Right,
Loving, right.
Yeah. Don't recall, but it's within recent history.
Right, absolutely. So, so that was really impactful. And I remember too, I had friends in school. Well, we had integration happening at that time.
How'd you feel about that?
So, I can remember, it's funny, I don't remember the girls' names, but Samuel Best was one of the boys who was bussed in. And, I could picture him perfectly, but I don't remember his name. And Samuel wore glasses, and he was really probably one of the smartest kids in class. And, you know, it's shameful. I remember, you know, when you walked together down the hall, you held hands with your classmates.
Mm-hmm.
And I was holding hands with a girl, black girl, and I remember thinking how different her hand felt to me. In kind of a negative way. There was definitely racism in the community. There's no question. And sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. Definitely, like, within my home, you know, there was Yiddish that was used. I mean, we spoke Yiddish in the home. And there was definitely reference to black people in a negative way, on one hand. On the other hand, not. It was a very kind of mixed message. Because my parents they worked with people who were black, and my mother always talked about having friends when she was young. And yet there was, at the same time, they used the word schwarz, which is Yiddish for black, and it wasn't a descriptor, it was definitely a pejorative. Mm-hmm. And so I learned some of that, you know, and then you have to unlearn it as you get older. So there were boys that I really would have loved to have dated as I got older, and I just knew that was not going to fly. Like, just don't even think about it. Which, you know, is kind of sad to me now. But that was definitely the culture. Sad to say, but. So this is very interesting in that vein. When I left New York, I moved to Florida. And I moved to Florida to go to graduate school in Gainesville, which is North Florida, right near Georgia. And I experienced some significant anti-Semitism at that time, once I left, which I was not really prepared for. But I later moved to Orlando, and I met this guy who was Hispanic, and we got to talking. And it turned out that he lived on my street, on Morris Avenue, after we moved to Co-op City. And I remember saying to him, yeah, Co-op City was great, but it ruined the Bronx. Okay. Well, what do you mean by that? He said. Well, because we all left the Bronx and moved to Co-op City. Well, that's when he moved into the neighborhood. My perception was that the neighborhood was ruined because, let's face it, because the white people left and moved to Co-op City and other people moved in. And I'm talking to this guy who became a friend of mine, and I'm saying these things, and he's talking about how great the neighborhood was because it was a mixed neighborhood. So Hispanic people moved in, black people moved in. He said, and the elderly white Jewish women who couldn't move were still living there. And it was wonderful. And he described how great it was, and it was so eye-opening to me at that time. And again, I say it's like shameful to me now to think about what my perception was at that time. But that, in truth, was the perception.
Okay. All right. What high school did you go to?
Well, that's another story. I was supposed to go to Walton High School, which was the all-girls high school near DeWitt Clinton. But I really didn't want to go there. It was an all-girls school. It had a reputation for being really rough. There were rumors about people flushing babies down the toilet. I mean, it was really like horrendous. And so my mom took really good care of me. And what she did was, we had friends from the bungalow colonies where we went in the summers who lived on Pelham Parkway. And Pelham Parkway District was Columbus High School. And so she officially changed my address, even though we still lived on Morris Avenue. In October, I remember, of the year before I had to go to high school, she made an official address change to the school. So they allowed me to go to the same junior high and finish there. And then my official address was Pelham Parkway. So I got to go to Columbus High School. So when we moved to Co-op City, I was going to Columbus High School.
Okay.
Whereas some other people went to Roosevelt, or they went to the high school in Co-op City, or they went to Science, or they went to Walton.
Did you take a city bus? That's a little journey for you from Co-op City.
Yeah, we took a public bus. Well, just like if I had gone from Morris Avenue, and I did. I started when I was living there, even though that was not my official address. We took a bus on the Grand Concourse up to Fordham Road, and then we took the Fordham Road bus down to Pelham Parkway. Now, there was a legal way to change your school. So if you were districted to go to Walton High School, and you said you wanted to take either Hebrew language or Latin, which they did not offer, you could go to another school where they offered it. So I had friends who went to Columbus from the other neighborhoods because they took either Hebrew or Latin. And I just got to go because my mother changed my address, which was, I have to say, pretty savvy. It wasn't legal, it wasn't really right, but it was pretty clever.
How old were you at Co-op City?
So I think I got there. So we moved in 70 or 71, so I would have been 15. I had already started high school. Loved it. Loved living there. There were lots of kids that I met, and they all went to different high schools. And in fact, I lived there through college because I was able to take advantage of free college at that time. The city system had free college. I went to Queens. I was talking to Gary on the way down how most people from the Bronx went to Lehman College. Some went to Queens. It was my perception that Queens was like the Harvard of the city system. So that's where I wanted to go. So that's where I went. And that, you talk about a trip, that required 2 or 3 buses to get to school.
Wow. Now, back in Morris Avenue, whether down Morris or up Morris Avenue, both your residences, were there gangs in your neighborhood or street organizations?
No, it was a safe place to be.
God,
at least not to my awareness.
In Co-op City? Any memories?
No, don't think so. Don't remember that.
Okay, what building were you at Co-op City?
I was on Carver Loop, which was building 11. And it was a triple core. That was the red building that had 3 sections. We were in the middle. And my parents lived there for, I think, 50 years until my dad passed away. And then my mom, they were snowbirds to Florida for a few years. My mom would go down to Florida, and then she just couldn't do that anymore. And we moved her up to Connecticut.
Okay.
And there was definitely a shift over that period of time. It was the same kind of shift, demographic that happened earlier in the Bronx, I would say, as people got older and either died or moved to Florida or moved to Arizona, wherever they were going to retire to. I think the demographic shifted again. So I think probably in the early days, in the late 60s, early 70s, it was probably, I don't know what the numbers were, but it was definitely majority white. At this point, I don't know what it is, but it's probably opposite, I'm going to guess. And I know they've reappointed, the brick on the buildings, and there were beautiful parks, and the apartments were beautiful. They had air conditioning. I mean, we really thought we had died and gone to heaven moving into an air-conditioned apartment.
Nice. Any other memories of the Bronx you'd like to share?
There's probably so many. We've probably hit a lot of the highlights, I would say.
Okay. Were you involved in any girls' organizations, girls'
Just
clubs?
Miss Herman's, the Cheergivers. And
Where's that located at?
that was right on 180th Street and between Morris and Walton. It was just like a little storefront, a room. And we would just go there and hang out on Friday nights. I think it was the big night that we would go. Yeah, it was fun.
Talk to me about what did you do for activities in Co-op City? Jumping back to Co-op City.
Yeah, Co-op
You're
City. I'm a high
girl.
school girl, so I'm going to high school. I'm working.
Okay, where?
I worked at the supermarket in Co-op City as a cashier. So I didn't really have that much time to socialize, but I did there. So the teens would hang out in the Co-op City Center. So where the grocery stores were, the stores were, there was a square, an outdoor square, that everybody would just go hang out. And that's what we did at night. We'd go hang out. And it was great.
Awesome. When did you leave the Bronx?
I left the Bronx when I was 20 to move to Florida to go to graduate school. So that would have been 1976. I went down there, chose Florida to go to school because I was dating somebody for years and he was there for law school. And I moved to Florida to be near him. And then we broke up. So it all worked. I met my husband down there, so that was okay.
Awesome.
Worked. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other memories of, say, Co-op City?
No, you know what? It's really all very positive.
Great.
I'm sure not all of it was, but having grown up in a loving family with two grandmothers right there with me the whole time was really a wonderful thing.
Now, you said you had children.
Yes, I have 3 children.
How have your children coming back, to New York? Have you gone to the old neighborhoods with them, reminisced?
It's interesting. They know all the stories. They know the neighborhoods. They certainly know Co-op City the best because my parents live there. So we would just go visit Grandma and Grandpa, and that's how they know it. I think I may have taken them to Morris Avenue once, long time ago, and I'd actually like to do that again. I have 3 daughters. My youngest daughter moved to the city, as many young people have done of late. Was living in Manhattan, was living in Brooklyn, and just 2 weeks ago left Brooklyn and is now back in Connecticut. The other 2, one lives in Connecticut, the other lives in Massachusetts. They are all living in suburban environments. I have 5 grandchildren, and even they know some of the stories because, I talk about it.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. We like to end all of our oral history interviews by asking one question.
Yeah.
What does the Bronx mean to you?
It's my heart. Yeah. It's funny. After not being here for so long, and like I said, only living here for not even a quarter of my life. Well, no, I take that back. But 20 years and almost 70, right? So 50 years not living there. It's who I am. Yeah, it's great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Michele Abrams.
Thank you.
For the Bronx County Historical Society's Oral History Projects.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.